Hi guys, and welcome to Back in Time Fiction, the channel dedicated to historical fiction and fantasy. Today we are actually going to focus more on the fantasy side with the first collaboration of the channel with Tori from ToriTalks. After this little chat between Tori and I invite you to go check her channel if you don't know it yet. She has an amazing channel dedicated to fantasy and some other things as well related to literature in general. I invited Tori on Back in Time Fiction so that we could discuss historical fantasy and fantasy in general, a topic I haven't really touched much yet. Here we go. Hi Tori, nice meeting with you. Nice putting a face on the name. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Perfect day. Like finally managed to get some sleep. So
Good.
this is quite a miracle in my life right now.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm looking forward to answer the question for your channel as well. We are going to talk about something that I rarely dive in. It's a fantasy. So in my channel's name, it's written Back in Time Fiction, historical fiction and fantasy. I never really do the fantasy side much, the historical fantasy side much. So that's why I was really happy to talk with you, because you are to me a fantasy expert, based on what I can see on your channel and
Well, thank you.
and on your Twitter handle. So yeah, looking forward to go more into the fantasy part of this conversation. I just want to ask a few questions about you as a reader first.
Yeah.
If that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I can see, and people who follow you on Twitter or watch your channel, and I think everyone should watch ToriTalks. It's really well made. Everyone knows that you read a lot. Like I always feel like you have a new book every day on Twitter. You're like, hey, today I received this one, or I'm just about to start this one. So first question, how do you do this? How do you read so much? Like,
it's really funny because being in the fantasy reading community on Twitter and on Booktube, I feel like I don't read that much. And like I know people that read twice as many books as I do in a month. And of course, it's never like the quantity never is the point. It's always about reading books that you want to read and love. But I don't know. I think part of it is as a mom, and I'm sure that you can relate to this as a parent, that we need that connection to sanity sometimes.
Escapism, a bit.
Yeah. And books ever since I was a kid have been my go-to. I didn't watch as much TV when I was a kid. It was more books than TV. And so I've always been that's my comfort food, I guess, in a way. And my husband and I usually read every night before we go to bed. We sit on our bed and we read each, have our own books, and we'll talk about it back and forth. Yeah. And I think having the community too has really helped get me excited about reading. I mean, there's so many good books right now. It's so hard to decide, what to read next. So I think I'm always trying to get through the book I'm reading, and I'm excited about it because I want to get to the next one, which
so I'm guessing
never ending.
You must have a TBR list that's like long like a day without bread.
I think my Goodreads, my Goodreads TBR right now, I think is at like 360 some books. So yeah, I'm very click happy when it comes to adding things to my TBR because I don't want to lose it. So yeah, I've tried to work through as many as I can and not stress too much about the ones I haven't read yet.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Now, subsequent question. So how many do you actually finish? So the books you show, the books you start. So how many do you actually finish?
I don't DNF books very often. Typically, the only reason I will is if the writing style just really isn't working for me and I'm having to push myself through the book because I don't want to burn out and then not want to read anything. Or if, I don't know, I think I've probably finished, I want to say like 95% of the books that I start. Yeah, I'm very picky about which books I start. And then I'll
Oh.
usually give it about 10, 20 pages to really hook me, and then I'm good.
So your TBR list is like 300 something books, you said, but actually you don't get all of them, right? You get picky after putting them on the list.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
I get that. So I think this summer I had a very long reader's block. Because the thing is, I have trouble writing and reading at the same time. If I'm writing,
can see that.
I can't switch to reader's mindset. So when I read a book as a writer,
Mhm.
I'm getting very picky. I'm like, oh, this
Yes.
sentence is awful. It's terrible.
Yep.
This is
I
a
would not
great
have
book.
done that way.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, oh, he used twice the same word in the same sentence. I can't read that book. This is
Yep.
terrible, right? And so I had this very long reader's block where I just started books and they looked amazing, and I'm sure they are, but I had to push them for later, and it took me forever to get over this reader's block. So does that happen to you? Do you have moments when you just can't read anymore, or you just can't focus on a book? And if so, how do you overcome reader's block?
I do definitely get reader's block, and I kind of refer to it as kind of a burnout, where, and that happened to me between 2021 and now in 2022 for about 6 to 8 months. I had just started my YouTube channel in 2020, and I read so many books in 2020 and 2021, the beginning part. And I burned out, and I read a lot of really thick books. I read a bunch of Brandon Sanderson. I read a bunch of, these really big fantasy books. And I kind of ground to a halt in the middle of 2021, or the end of 2021 to the beginning of 2022. And I stopped putting stuff on my YouTube channel, and I was focusing on a lot of things going on in my personal life. I've found now I'm a better, smarter reader now, and I think I don't succumb to peer pressure as much about, oh, you should read this book. I listen to the friends that I have that I trust their reading taste, and I will put those on my TBR, but I'm also careful that I don't push myself into books that I might not be in the mood for as much. And one thing I've found helpful with reading those really chonker fantasy books, which can be a commitment, is I kind of space either a different genre or a comfort read in between them. So, for example, I was reading John Gwynn's Faithful and the Fallen, and in between those, I was putting like these really short, like middle grade comfort reads from when I was younger, just so it was like kind of a palate cleanser almost. And that worked really well. But yeah, I would say those were kind of the two big ones that I've changed how I approach my TBR and what I'm reading. So.
All right, so no pressure from like what you should read, and a bit of different kinds of stories or in between thick books. No, I get it. All right, makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I'm very impressed by still, even if you say you read less than some others, I'm like, I can't do this. Just don't have enough minutes in the day for reading that much.
My husband, we kind of discovered that there's very different types of readers. But my husband and I are completely opposite, where he says the words in his head as he's reading the book. I don't do that. And I didn't even know that was a thing people did until my husband explained how he reads. And that explained to me why he reads so much slower, is because he's literally reading the book to himself and I'm just skimming through it. So he reads much fewer books, but he also, I would say, retains them better than I do. So, there's pros and cons to everything.
I think I'm more like you. I'm more of a very fast reader. I can read books in like 1 or 2 goes, and that's it. I have a very good friend who is like very jealous because he would love to read more, but he just can't. He's probably like your husband, like reading every word, and then remaking the sentences in his head, So yeah, I think we are quite lucky. It's just I don't have it in me to read as much as you. And plus, I'm very getting picky on the genre and everything. The more it goes, the pickier I get. So, and I think maybe what you call the burnout is exactly what I had, where I
Mm,
just read so many historical fiction books in like a couple of years that I had to take a break from
yeah.
the genre a little bit. Let's talk about this actually. So, as you know, I'm a big fan of historical fiction, and I
Yeah.
do read what I consider historical fantasy. Now, I know not everyone will call historical fantasy the same thing. You know, like some books
Yeah.
will be considered historical fantasy, but people will say no, that's more historical fiction. So, yourself, how do you make the difference between those two subgenres?
Well, it's funny when I didn't even know that historical fantasy was its own genre until
Mm,
coming onto Booktube. I've learned so many things from
yeah.
Booktube, coming outside of my tiny little reading bubble. Um, I think for me, just as a very non-expert in this area, would be, the historical fiction really tries to be as factual as possible in and honoring, what was actually going on at the time and the characters in it. Even if you are introducing characters that, don't necessarily exist in historical records. Fantasy, when you add the fantasy element to it, I think it takes a little bit more liberty
Mhm.
with, you might introduce magical elements into a historical setting, or you might, you know, creatures that, like the folk tales, I
Mm,
think are a very good example of that, where it's
very
set in a
true.
very historical era, but you have all these fantastic creatures that come out of the woodwork, and that kind of adds that fantasy element to it, while still honoring the original, historical era. I guess that would be my
Yeah.
explanation.
All right. So the addition of magic and
And
creatures from
yeah.
uh, things that might not have sounded so weird back then, you know, because
Right.
people maybe believed it in magic and in like dragons and
Yeah.
everything. So all right. In that case, yeah, I think I'm really close to the to what you just said too. On my side, like if you bring magic, if you make it obvious that magic exists, then
Yeah.
it's historical fantasy.
Yeah.
There two of my favorite books are I'm sorry, my English pronunciation is going to be terrible. Two of my favorite books are Arthurian tales, so a
Yeah.
retelling
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
King Arthur, and one of them is by Bernard Cornwell, which is very historical fiction. And in this novel, you never really know if magic is exists or not, and that's why I
Right.
absolutely love it. It's like it's there, but you never have a proof of it until the very
Yeah.
end. Now, the other one is Lancelot by Giles Christian, where you start the book knowing that magic exists. So,
Sure.
I consider this one historical fantasy, while the first one would
Okay.
be historical fiction. Now, most people would call Lancelot historical fiction book. So,
Sure.
I guess it depends a lot uh,
Yeah,
on the readers as well.
for sure. I actually it's on my shelf somewhere. I just picked up Giles Christian's Lancelot because I'd heard so many good things about it. And
Yeah,
Arthurian legends, I feel like, are something that they never get old in a way, because it's such a great story and there's so many parts of it to explore. But at some point, you feel like maybe you've seen
yeah.
all
That's
that but this one I've heard is a very fresh take on it.
that's the thing, after reading the Bernard Cornwell one, I felt like I couldn't read King Arthur anymore. I was like, that's it, you can't do better than that. And
Right.
and I actually tried a bunch, and some of them were good, but they didn't reach that level, right? So then I
Mm,
love Giles Christian's work before Lancelot. I really like his Vikings
okay.
double trilogy, amazing. And
Yeah.
so I picked up Lancelot because it's Giles Christian, not because it's about Lancelot. And that was like a whole other world. Like I really feel like they are about the same level, those two stories,
Okay.
Bernard Cornwell and Giles Christian take. And the Bernard Cornwell book makes Lancelot a villain, like I'm sorry to say it, an asshole.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
he's awful, while Giles Christian does the exact opposite. So you're like, I didn't think I could like this character in any other book, and then Christian came and is like, "Yep, here you go. You will love
Let me
Lancelot."
show you.
Perfect. So please enjoy. Tell me what you feel about
I definitely
Lancelot
will.
after. Um, Personally, I even prefer the one after Camelot.
Oh, okay.
It's not a popular opinion. I believe many people prefer Lancelot. I preferred Camelot
Okay.
because there is a bit less magic. actually.
Ah,
So it feels a bit more historical than
sure.
fantasy. So yeah, but please enter.
So would you, I was going to say, so would you say that you lean more toward historical fiction or historical fantasy when
Oh,
you're reading?
fiction, definitely fiction.
Yeah.
I have actually, well, a lot of your viewers will hate me for this, but I cannot stand dragons, for example.
Okay.
So I need to explain because I can feel the
Yeah.
wave of hate. So,
I no judgment.
so I don't have any problem with dragon. I just don't believe that a creature that should be so strong, so clever would be obedient to human beings, you know? And I'm always like, it's like giving a bazooka to a medieval story, you know, like a very
Yeah.
clever super weapon. I'm like, it makes things, I don't know, not easy per se, but like
Yeah.
it gives an edge that I don't really like. I like when the conflict is kind of on the same level.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense.
So yeah, I like dragons when they are dumb. I'm okay with dumb dragons being being ridden by people. But clever dragons should try just to dominate the planet. That's it. That makes sense.
Exactly. Well, it's funny actually. So I'll jump in with you and I'll just say that dragons are also not my particular favorite mythical creature in fantasy. So I like them when they're done well. And I'm willing to suspend that disbelief a little bit for certain books. But yeah, I prefer other mythical creatures to dragons. So now all the dragon lovers can be angry at us together.
Oh, nice. Good. Let's make sure we get the whole side of fantasy readers against
Right.
us. So what kind of a fantasy creature do you prefer?
Oh man.
That's a tough one. Sorry.
It is a tough one. Oh goodness. I actually would love to make a video about this
Ooh,
on
yeah.
my channel, just mythical creatures and the ones that are my favorites. One of my favorites has always been minotaurs, actually. And I think there is space for them to be done a lot more in the fantasy genre because there's so much you could do with that. I don't know if you've seen the newer Chronicles of Narnia films.
Nope.
But in the new Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a character, General Ottman, who is a big, massive Minotaur general, and he's got like the armor, and he's just I watched the movie partially just for him because he's so cool. So yeah, I would say Minotaurs are, if not my favorite, one of my favorites for sure.
Right. Nice. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Japanese yokai.
Oh yeah.
There's a whole lore about yokai that is absolutely fantastic, and those guys are more on the villain side, but not always for brutality's sake, but
mischievous.
Just mischievous. Exactly. Yeah. You know, you have a bit of a Loki in them, you know, in the way they trick people, and the lessons that people took from them in the past, like don't play near the river because the yokai will snatch you.
Yeah.
So, I love this side of Japanese culture.
That's awesome.
I think they make really good fantasy creatures.
Yeah, they do. Absolutely. Yeah.
And is there something else? I mean, no, okay, dragon is my my thing. But is there anything in fantasy that you cannot stand, or one part of fantasy that makes you say no to a book?
As I was reading through the questions that you sent me, this was the one that I stopped on the longest because I was like, what are my pet peeves? And I don't know that I have one specific to the fantasy genre itself. I think you'll find it in a lot of fantasy genres. This will maybe be another unpopular opinion. I'm not a big fan of the chosen one tropes.
All right. Yeah.
Because one of the things that is hard, at least the character, like the side characters and everything else going around them might be fine. But the difficulty I have with those is that it gives the character plot armor. Where the tension of, is this character going to be okay, isn't as strong with a chosen one, because most people aren't going to kill off their chosen one character because usually they're the title character or they're, featured through the whole series. So whenever they try to write scenes where it's like this big, really tense moment with the chosen one, I'm like, well, they're fine. Like, they're not going to die. So I'm not that worried about it, So that's something that I'm very picky about chosen one themes. in books in general.
I don't know if you played this game in 20 years ago, maybe, called the Bard's Tale. And
I've heard of it.
yeah, and it's exactly what you just said. It's a video game that put the chosen one trope on its head, where you realize that the character is the chosen one, and he realizes as he goes that he's like the 100th chosen one, and they all died halfway through the mission, and he's the chosen one of nothing, Basically,
Yep,
he has to
that's
make
awesome.
himself the chosen one. So that was a very good game just for this.
Yeah.
I should try to find it again.
It's fun when it's twisted. I enjoy when people intentionally take the chosen one theme and make it very different. But yeah, there's the straight chosen one tropes I have a hard time with.
Yeah, that's true. Plus they tend to be a bit too often, this handsome dude.
Yeah. The handsome farm boy from...
exactly
Yeah.
They look too much like Jon Snow most of the
exactly
time, so.
Yeah.
All right,
Jon Snow has his positives for sure, but he's definitely not my favorite Game of Thrones character.
Well, no, but like everyone was so happy when Arya killed the king, the White Walker King. That was perfect. That was a way to go back on the chosen one trope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I really love, not to get too far into Game of Thrones because we could talk about that for an hour, but I love the relationship between Jon and Arya a lot. It's very sweet.
Well, talking about Game of Thrones and dragons, I love I know, again, very unpopular opinion. I love the ending of the Game of Thrones series, like not the king, the king's choice. Sorry, let's not go there, but Daenerys going mental, I saw it coming from season 2, so I was really happy when it actually happened. So it's not that I liked it, I just liked the fact that I saw it coming, and that was quite interesting. All right, now about 95% of your viewers absolutely hate my guts. So
that's okay.
It's my viewers too. No,
we could honestly probably have we could have a series of discussions on the characters of Game of Thrones, because there's a wealth of discussion topics there.
Conflicting opinions.
Yes. Yep.
So all right, back on topic in that case. Let's not discuss too much about Game of Thrones. In the fantasy genre, or let's call it the historical fantasy genre, do you see any new trends appearing? Because you've been reading for quite a while in this particular genre, so any new trends?
I think, well, one that you mentioned that we'll touch on later is the appearance of a lot of Asian-inspired fantasy series, which I love because I've always been very interested in Asian history. And so I love seeing that. I've also surprisingly noticed some like American Western themes coming back, which I'm also not mad about. I love a good Western shootout story, but mixed with fantasy is just there's so many different ways you can go with that. So I think those are the two that I've noticed since coming back to Booktube after my hiatus. Those were like the front, especially the Asian inspired fantasies. And I have two of them that I've been hearing from everyone currently that I have to read this year yet, is the Jade City by Fonda Lee, and then Grace of Kings, the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu.
Ken Liu is really good. Yeah,
I've heard so many good things.
I recommend
it. I'm excited. I'm very excited for both of those.
If you want in a historical, more fiction, but it's very fantasy as well, there is the Poppy Wars. I forgot if there is a
Poppy War. Yeah.
Very good too. I don't know why I didn't continue the series, but the first one was brilliant.
Yeah, that one's been a big topic as well on Booktube.
Yeah, but that's something too I noticed, but I was wondering if that's because I researched the Chinese fiction or Asian fiction in general more, so I started to notice more of those books. But I feel like there is a new wealth of a lot of stories based on Asian culture, Asian cultures, sorry. And especially in the YA category. So it's quite amazing.
And it's starting to come into adult fantasy too now, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's becoming this trend?
I think, readers, and I think especially fantasy readers, we are always excited for new ideas and new cultures. Where most of us are very obsessed with culture in general and learning about different cultures, whether it's completely fantasy or heavily influenced by a specific culture. And I think, you know, there's so much of the beginning of fantasy in a lot of the modern industry was so based in Western European folklore and, you know, Viking tales and all of that. And I think people are starting to broaden that horizon of, oh, like, but look at all of, like you said, the yokai from Japan and all of these different incredible, you know, folk tales and legends of, I just watched your video on the General Guan Yu. And just, I mean, we always love the stories of how many, you know, fierce warriors have we seen in influencing fantasy. And I think it's just kind of pushing the boundaries even farther of what people are going to be able to experience. And we're looking for new experiences in fantasy. And I think that's been a big open door for letting in a lot of these newer cultural influences.
Oh, that's very true. Yeah, on my side, I always believe it's because of the popularity of the manga anime culture for the past 20 years. I don't know for you, but in France, when I was a kid, a teenager, you couldn't really say you liked manga. Most kids would be like, "Oh, you suck, you're a bit lame." Then 10 years later, my little sister, you know, she was like me. She liked Japanese culture, manga, and everyone around her was the same. You know, all of a sudden we went from this is lame to this is what's cool.
Is really cool.
So, and I feel because of this acceptance, then the literature less picturesque. Yeah, it starts to reflect this pleasure into the Asian cultures. Plus, people have the keys now to read them. You know,
exactly.
People might know what is a yokai. People might know what is exactly a samurai or
Shinigami.
Exactly, those things are unknown. So I think it might be a bit of that. I'm really excited to see it expand.
Me too.
More.
So yeah, I think with anime, that's a really good point, because I grew up where it was just starting to become really cool to like anime. And in some circles, I would say some of my friends were like, "What do you watch?" But I would say that for me, at least, one of the reasons why I love so many books that are inspired by Asian cultures is because I started with anime, and that was one of my big gateways into fantasy. Rurouni Kenshin was one that I watched very early on, and just the legends of the samurai in general was always such a cool, interesting part of history to me. So yeah, I think that is a really good point, that definitely has pulled people from that kind of storytelling into, you know, the themes that we are seeing in adult fantasy. And now it's, like you said, more familiar, and we just kind of fall into it because it's something that we already love.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. And even in stories that are not Asian per se in their culture, you can feel the same topics or ideas, like you know, your typical shonen will imply a young boy going through hardship, training, becoming the man he's supposed to become. And you can feel it in many books that have nothing to do with Japan. You will see in Lancelot. In Lancelot, it's exactly like this. So I think we get used to this kind of stories from manga and anime, and it helps us appreciate other stories as well. So.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show too how, you know, so many of the same stories are just inherently human. You know, those stories of the young boy who comes from, you know, kind of a poor village, and he is raised up into this warlord eventually as an adult, and that journey, I think, is you see that in so many different cultures and stories, where all of us just really, we're all there rooting for him regardless of what culture he's from. And
that's true.
And it's just influenced by, you know, the environment around him and the culture he comes from. But yeah, it's cool how many of those things you can see are just the same regardless of where in the world you go, and that kind of brings that sort of just we're all human and we all love the same stories at the end of the day.
Yeah, we might tell them differently, but we love
Exactly.
the same, stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any other culture or yeah, any other country or culture you would like to see more represented in novels?
Yes. All of them. Yeah, I think
Or
I'm
period as well, any time period that you
oh
would.
goodness. I'm very I love a lot of Korean dramas. And so I've been getting into researching more about Korean history, and I would love to see, you know, some of that coming into the fantasy genre. I also just picked up Khan Iggulden's Genghis
Awesome.
book, and I'm very interested in Mongolian culture and history, and I've been wanting to kind of dig into that next. So I would say those are the two that pop into my head immediately. I also think it's really cool. There's just such a plethora of rich cultures around the world that you know, some that I think that are maybe smaller and not talked about as much, that if you did some digging, there's just so much there that you could pull into fantasy. I don't know if you've read or heard of Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. He wrote, and
it has dragon in it. I didn't. I didn't register.
Well, what he actually wrote his, I have it on my shelf here. He actually wrote his this is his debut novel, and it's very influenced by kind of African tribal culture, and really was unlike anything I'd read in fantasy before. And he just did an incredible job showcasing that richness of the environment and the culture that his characters are in. So yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it coming from all over the place, and I think it's only going to keep growing, and I'm just excited to see what comes next, honestly.
Yeah. I think that you made a very good point right now with this book. All right, for once I'm interested because I really want to get more. I would love to read more novels set in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, like in old time Africa or Mongolia as well. Yeah, maybe not next, but but I'll put it somewhere in the list. But no, I would love to read more historical fiction set in Africa, in Mongolia as well. I loved this Conqueror series by Genghis Khan, by Conning Gulden about Genghis Khan is amazing. Now I have my small issues with Conning Gulden, but not because of those books. So
good.
Basically, I would love to read more stories about cultures that didn't have writing systems. So we didn't record as much about them. The first book I wrote in historical fiction was set in pre-Viking period Scandinavia, so in the Vendel period. So we don't know much about the reality. We have many legends about this time. Most of them came afterwards. They were written after the fact, so we just don't know much. But there was like a lot of activity there. So this is the kind of story I would love to read more. Like there was this great book. I loved Aztec as well.
Yes, Aztec and Mayan for sure that's actually a really good one that I would like to see more of too.
So yeah, like this kind of not as represented historical fiction would be absolutely amazing. I made a video about Samarkand from Amin Malouf, who is a French speaking writer, so French writing writer, and he wrote a few books about so this one is about Samarkand, so in Central Asia, but he also wrote what's the English name? Leo Africanus or something.
Oh,
so in French, it's Léon l'Africain. So Leo Africanus, same, it's in Africa. So those are very, very good books. I'd love to see more of those.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, I asked the question and I feel like
I want to like ask you all the questions back. I totally agree. And I think I remember being very interested, especially in college, with, you know, the Aztec and the Mayan cultures. And I was just, someday I would love to visit South America and actually be able to see some of the ruins of like Machu Picchu and Chichen Itza and those places, because just, I mean, I remember reading about how they have a road in South America that was built during those times that is, it only deviates, it's so straight for like many, many miles that it only deviates like a quarter of an inch for that. And I'm like, how a culture that was able to create such incredible architecture and these, you know, amazing things, why that needs, like, there's a lot of things there that could be really powerful in a story.
There's a lot to unpack, and we keep discovering new things. When they started to show more of the Nazca lines, that was the same. Like everyone freaked out, like, oh my God, how did they do this kind of thing?
How did they do that? Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a lot that could be developed.
I think I would also put in a vote for one of the cultures that probably sparked my interest in ancient world cultures was Egypt. I would love to see Ethiopian and Egyptian, like ancient history represented in fantasy. That would be amazing. Also,
absolutely.
That's kind of on my back burner. If I ever choose to write a more directly historical fantasy, I think that would be a culture I would go for.
I would absolutely read that. Yeah, that would
Thank
be
you.
fun. So actually, that's a very good segue to my last question. What is coming for you in terms of like video, books? What are your projects?
Well, I have been very humbled, honestly, by the reception I had coming back to Booktube, and jumping over that 1,000 subscriber mark was honestly amazing. And I'm very grateful that people enjoy what I'm putting on YouTube. I'm really getting into a lot of self-published fantasy authors right now. And that's kind of where I want to put a good chunk of my time and effort on Twitter and Booktube, is getting some spotlight on some amazing up and coming self-published authors like yourself. And not necessarily limited to fantasy. I saw your book on Twitter and the cover itself, I was like, this looks like a book I want to read. And then I read the synopsis and I was like, yes, oh my gosh, oh, I can't get it yet, I have to pre-order it.
Sorry.
So no, that's fine. I already did. I've got it on pre-order, so I'm very excited to read it. But yeah, I'm working on my first epic fantasy novel that's been in the works. The world has been in the works for about 10 years now. So I'm finally at an age and an experience level, I feel like, where I can give it some justice. I have, you know, put in my time, so to speak, learning enough about my craft to feel like I can tackle something of that size now, which is very exciting. I'm excited to it's always fun to dig into a world that you've created and loved for that long. So I'm having a great time with it. It's still in first draft mode, so I don't have a ton of details yet.
I was going to say, give us the synopsis, right?
Yeah. So I don't even know what the synopsis is yet.
Can you give us some hints about this world? Like, just a few.
Oh, goodness. I'm bringing in a lot of influences from a lot of different places, and things that have really meant a lot to me in my life reading. And I have a culture that is dipping its toes into very slight influences of Mongolian warfare and tribal culture, very lightly. And I have a little bit of like Asian mixed with Viking, and like I'm trying to kind of merge certain things. And it's been fun to kind of build with building blocks of things that I've really loved in reading and storytelling throughout my life. So I'm bringing in a lot of my favorite things in this book, which is very vague, I realize. But I do start with a main POV that is a young boy who goes through some very tough defining things in his younger years, and it shapes him into someone that he would not have been otherwise.
All right.
So I'm very excited about that. It's very military fantasy action heavy. Because write what you like to read, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that makes me very interested into. Yeah, I really look forward to read this.
Thank you.
You mentioned Mongolian, Viking, and Japanese. You know, all of these together it feels
Why
right.
not just put it all in there? You
Exactly.
know.
Those are very cool cultures to put together. I didn't hear the word dragon, so
There are
it's
no
fine.
dragons.
Nice.
No,
Nice.
there are no there are creatures in the story, but I'm creating them from scratch for the most part.
Really
So
cool.
you have, I mean, you have your typical like vipers and you know, birds and stuff, but I am putting in a few new creatures of my own making. So
Yeah, that's really nice. I look forward to it.
thank you.
Good luck with the the first
Thank
draft.
you.
And but the first draft is the funny one, so good luck with the rest because
It's been a journey.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in any case, thanks a lot, Tori, for joining me today. And I hope everyone who watched the video all the way to the end will go on your channel and check it and subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe, leave comments and everything, guys.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So for those who want to follow more on this conversation, we'll have a second video on your channel about my mostly about my upcoming book, but about other things too, I hope, right?
Yes, I'm going to put you on the author interview chair.
Nice. My very first interview. So if you want to watch my very first interview, switch to ToriTalks.
Awesome.
All right. Have a nice day, and I'll see you very soon.